originally published by Afterhours Archive 613. This audio edition is adapted from the original written article, Deadly Apples and the Atmosphere Modern Culture Lost. Why Intense Live Music Still Matters in an Increasingly Sanitized World. Editor's Note. This article was written with the awareness and permission of Deadly Apples. All quoted lyrics remain the property of Deadly Apples and their respective rights holders. Before we begin, there is something difficult to explain about the energy of a genuinely intense live concert. Not just loud music, not just flashing lights or heavy bass. Something else. The feeling of unpredictability. The feeling of a venue's energy changing in real time as something new emerges from the crowd, the music, and the moment itself. Electric, palpable, and cohesive. A room full of individuals becoming part of a shared experience that transcends an event schedule. It exists entirely in the moment present, immediate and ever-moving. The sense that something could happen at any moment. For a few hours, people stop scrolling and curating themselves for algorithms and social feeds. The experience becomes about being fully present rather than performative. Loud enough to drown out the noise of everyday digital life. In an era where so much of modern culture feels optimized, polished, controlled, monetized, and flattened into content, live music still remains one of the few places where unpredictability can survive. And maybe that is part of why people still crave it so deeply. Afterhours Archive Artist Feature. Deadly Apples and the Atmosphere Modern Culture Lost. Why Intense Live Music Still Matters in an Increasingly Sanitized World. Canadian cities like Ottawa and Montreal are often misunderstood in similar ways. People on the outside sometimes reduce them to surface-level identities. Politics, tourism, food, universities, sports, work, winter. But beneath those simplified narratives, alternative scenes continued existing quietly and consistently throughout the broader Canadian live music ecosystem. Heavy music never disappeared. Industrial culture never disappeared. Underground and alternative communities never disappeared either. They simply became less visible within the increasingly algorithm-driven version of internet culture that now shapes how people discover music, nightlife, and identity itself. That shift matters. Over the last decade, many cultural experiences have slowly become scripted, safer, cleaner, more optimized, and easier to package into short-form content designed for visibility and engagement. Music festivals became branding opportunities. Nightlife became aestheticized for social media. Entire scenes started feeling curated more for documentation than participation. But much of live heavy music still resists that. That tension is part of what makes bands like Deadly Apples interesting beyond simply being another rock band. The Montreal-based industrial metal project fronted by vocalist and lyricist Alex Martel, alongside drummer, composer, and producer Antoine Lamothe, has spent years building a reputation not only through their music, but through the energy surrounding their performances. The people behind the music. At the center of Deadly Apples are vocalist and lyricist Alex Martel and drummer, composer, and producer Antoine Lamothe. Alex Martel is perhaps best known not only as the frontman of Deadly Apples, but also as the founder of Montebello Rockfest, one of Canada's largest rock and alternative music festivals. Through both the band and the festival, Alex Martel has spent years helping connect Canadian audiences with major artists from across the global rock, metal, punk, and alternative music landscape. For many people within Canadian rock and alternative music communities, Alex Martel became known not only through Deadly Apples, but through his role in helping create spaces where music culture could thrive. Through Montebello Rockfest, he helped bring together artists, fans, and scenes from across Canada and around the world, building connections that extended far beyond a single festival weekend. That perspective as both a performer and a builder of music communities continues to shape the identity of Deadly Apples today. Antoine Lamothe serves as the band's primary musical architect, shaping much of Deadly Apple's sonic identity through songwriting, composition, production, and arrangement. His work blends industrial textures, heavy percussion, electronic elements, and cinematic atmosphere into the sound that has become synonymous with the band. Over the years, Antoine Lamothe has become a driving force behind the band's evolving sound, helping bridge industrial, alternative, electronic, and modern heavy music influences into something distinctly Deadly Apples. Together, the pair have built Deadly Apples into a project that extends beyond traditional genre boundaries, while remaining firmly connected to industrial, alternative, and heavy music culture. Not polished perfection. Energy. Intensity. Unpredictability. Raw and real. The kind of live presence that feels increasingly rare in modern entertainment culture. Deadly Apples originally emerged from Quebec's alternative and industrial scene in the early 2010s, before entering a 7-year hiatus in 2011, while Alex Martel focused on building Montebello Rockfest into one of Canada's largest rock festivals. That pause ultimately became part of the band's story. When Deadly Apples returned in 2017 for a reunion performance at Montebello Rockfest, shortly before Rammstein took the stage, the comeback quickly evolved into something far larger than a one-time return. Within a year, the band had aggressively re-entered the international touring circuit. In 2018, Deadly Apples toured Japan alongside Korn, while also appearing on the Japanese edition of Van's Warped Tour, alongside Limp Bizkit. That same year, they performed at major festivals across Mexico and South America, including Knotfest, Hell and Heaven Fest, Vivo XL Rock, and Machaca Fest, while also joining Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson on the Twins of Evil, the second coming U.S. arena tour throughout the summer of 2018. By that point, Deadly Apples were no longer functioning as a small regional act. They had become part of an international alternative and industrial touring ecosystem spanning the United States, Mexico, South America, Europe, and Japan, while sharing stages with artists including Korn, Rob Zombie, Marilyn Manson, Deftones, Rammstein, Front 242, and Slipknot. That global movement matters enormously because it reflects how underground and alternative music culture functions in 2026. Scenes are no longer strictly local. They connect internationally through touring, festivals, online discovery, collaborations, and shared experience. And that collective energy matters more than most people realize. One of the recurring themes surrounding Deadly Apples across interviews, festival coverage, and industry press is unpredictability. Not recklessness for branding purposes. Not artificial controversy. Something more human than that. Catharsis. A sonic exorcism. The feeling of temporarily stepping outside the carefully managed emotional expectations modern life increasingly demands from people. For a few hours, the pressure to constantly perform disappears. People move, scream, collide, sweat, exist physically in the same space, instead of communicating entirely through algorithms and notifications. That emotional immediacy is becoming increasingly rare, especially as more entertainment becomes optimized around passive consumption. You can stream songs endlessly. You can scroll clips. You can consume aesthetics, curated messaging, and carefully controlled identities through recommendation systems designed to flatten everything into the same endless feed. But you cannot recreate the physical sensation of standing inside a loud room, while the bass vibrates through the floor and strangers move together under stage lights. That is being and living in the moment. Every event carries a different feeling depending on the crowd, the room, the energy, and the unpredictability of the night itself. You cannot fully digitize real human experience. And that is why live music still matters so deeply. Not because every concert changes your life. Not because every festival becomes transcendent. But because real-world experiences still carry unpredictability in ways the internet struggles to replicate authentically. That philosophy also exists inside the band's music itself. Beginning in early 2025, Deadly Apples began unveiling material from their upcoming full-length album Distress, including the singles Volatile, Envious and Little, and Sacrifice. Distress represents one of the clearest examples of Deadly Apple's connection to industrial and alternative music history, while also demonstrating where the band is taking those influences next. Volatile, released in February 2025, featured guest appearances from Richard Patrick of Filter and 9 Inch Nails, alongside Danny Lohner of 9 Inch Nails. The single was produced by Antoine Lamothe, mixed by Ben Gross, and developed through pre-production work with legendary producer Michael Bainhorn. Later in 2025, Sacrifice expanded that collaboration network even further. Richard Patrick again contributed vocals, while Danny Lohner handled guitars and bass. The track was mixed by Ben Gross, mastered by Tom Baker, and recorded partially using Lars Ulrich's iconic Black Album drum kit. Earlier collaborations throughout the band's history also included James "Monkey" Schaffer of Korn appearing on the track, further tying Deadly Apples to the lineage of artists that shaped industrial rock, alternative metal, and heavy music culture over the last several decades. A meeting of generations. The significance of Deadly Apple's recent collaborations becomes easier to understand when viewed through the history of the artists involved. Richard Patrick first gained recognition as an early touring guitarist for 9 Inch Nails before founding Filter, the alternative and industrial rock band responsible for songs such as Hey Man Nice Shot and Take a Picture. His influence helped shape industrial and alternative music throughout the 1990s and beyond. Danny Lohner became one of the most respected musicians within the 9 Inch Nails ecosystem, contributing to numerous recordings and live performances before collaborating with artists across industrial, alternative, and film soundtrack communities. James "Monkey" Schaffer, guitarist and founding member of Korn, helped define the sound of nu metal and one of the most influential heavy music movements of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Michael Bainhorn, who contributed pre-production work to Distress, is widely recognized for his work with artists including Korn, Soundgarden, Marilyn Manson, and Red Hot Chili Peppers. Ben Gross, responsible for mixing portions of the album, has worked with artists including Marilyn Manson, Disturbed, Sevendust, and Breaking Benjamin. Tom Baker, who mastered material for Distress, has contributed to recordings by 9 Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, Rob Zombie, and numerous other artists throughout modern rock and industrial music. These are not random guest appearances. They represent multiple generations of industrial, alternative, and heavy music history, intersecting with Deadly Apples in the present day. More importantly, these collaborations reflect a level of mutual respect. Artists who helped shape industrial rock, alternative music, and nu metal did not simply lend their names to a project. They contributed directly to music that continues pushing those traditions forward, rather than merely revisiting them. That history matters because Deadly Apples are not operating in isolation. They exist inside a much larger ecosystem of artists, producers, touring circuits, festivals, and alternative communities that have continued evolving long after mainstream culture stopped paying close attention to them. And perhaps that is one of the most interesting things about heavy music culture in 2026. It never really disappeared. It simply kept evolving underneath the surface. That intensity does not stop once the live performance ends. Built for the stage. What ultimately separates Deadly Apples from many studio-focused projects is that the music appears designed to live beyond the recording itself. The songs feel built for movement, built for crowds, built for the unpredictable chemistry that only exists when performers and audiences occupy the same physical space. Coverage of the band across multiple countries repeatedly returns to the same themes: intensity, unpredictability, physical commitment to the performance itself. Alex Martel has become known for throwing himself fully into live shows, often blurring the line between performer and audience. Whether appearing on festival stages, arena tour, or club dates, the performances carry a sense that anything could happen next. For a few moments, the barrier between artist and audience begins to disappear. The show stops feeling like something being watched and starts feeling like something being experienced collectively. That energy helped carry Deadly Apples from Quebec stages to major international festivals, arena tour, and audiences across multiple continents. It exists throughout the band's music itself. While the band's live reputation often receives the most immediate attention, the recordings themselves reveal why Deadly Apples have continued building momentum internationally. The intensity found on stage is not separate from the music. It is embedded within it. Under stress, Deadly Apples lean heavily into industrial tension, cinematic layering, aggressive percussion, distorted textures, analog synths, and emotionally volatile songwriting that often feels suspended somewhere between chaos and vulnerability. It brought back the bass, aesthetic, emotional connection, and sonic weight that helped define a generation throughout the 1990s, while simultaneously evolving those ideas for a newer audience discovering industrial and alternative music for the first time. For some listeners, it became rediscovery. For others, an introduction. Tracks like Volatile and Sacrifice do not rely on heaviness alone. Beneath the distortion sits a constant sense of pressure, instability, emotional tension, and psychological fragmentation that mirrors much of modern life itself. Anxiety, overstimulation, isolation, emotional exhaustion. The pressure to remain constantly visible, productive, optimized, aesthetically pleasing, and emotionally controlled. Lines from Volatile such as, "Your false safety, it's all gone," and "Forced to fade away / made-up virtues," feel especially reflective of the increasingly curated and performative atmosphere surrounding modern digital culture. Meanwhile, Sacrifice shifts inward emotionally through lines such as, "You became my religion," and "I feel it inside me, I'm falling to nothing," exploring devotion, collapse, obsession, identity loss, and emotional instability in ways that feel deeply human beneath the aggression. Rather than smoothing those feelings over, Deadly Apples translate much of that tension directly into sound. The music invites immersion, rather than passive participation and observation. And perhaps that is part of why the band connects so strongly inside live environments. The songs are not designed to sit quietly in the background. They demand presence. For listeners willing to engage with the themes inside the lyrics, the music reflects many of the emotional and cultural tensions modern society increasingly struggles to process honestly. One of the most surreal moments in the band's recent history came in March 2020 during performances at Hell and Heaven Fest in Mexico during the earliest days of the global COVID shutdowns. As festival cancellations spread across the world, Deadly Apples later described the experience as feeling like the last festival on Earth. Looking back now, that moment feels symbolic of something much larger. People realized very quickly how much live music spaces actually mattered once they disappeared. Not just for entertainment, for emotional connection, for community, for shared human experience. And perhaps that explains why live music culture continues, surviving despite constant predictions of its decline. Because no algorithm can fully reproduce the energy and emotional chemistry of physical spaces, filled with real people sharing the same experience in real time. As summer festival season expands again across Canada in 2026, that energy continues carrying forward through events like Festival au Lac in Granby, Quebec on June 6, 2026, and Festivois in Trois-Rivières on July 3, 2026, where Deadly Apples are once again bringing that intensity back into large outdoor festival spaces. And while the band itself exists within industrial rock and alternative metal, the broader appeal of those experiences reaches beyond genre alone. It becomes about the experience, movement, connection, the temporary suspension of everyday routine. That is part of why underground venues, heavy music festivals, alternative scenes, and independent live spaces continue mattering culturally even as modern life becomes increasingly filtered through screens. The human experience is what continues shining through. The need for real experiences, real sensations. Nothing meaningful should feel perfectly optimized all the time. Not every experience needs to feel safe, polished, or endlessly curated for visibility and trends. Some things are supposed to sound loud, feel chaotic, remain unpredictable. That is part of what makes them human. And perhaps that is exactly why people continue showing up. This audio edition was adapted from the original written article published by Afterhours Archive 613. References and source materials are available in the original written article published by Afterhours Archive 613.